and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 237, and today's date is December 12, 2013, and the title of this episode is The Economy is Collapsing, War is Coming, Beware of Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. And what we are seeing right now is that the central bankers are going after as many natural resources as they possibly can. They are making their move. They're moving into Africa. They're trying to capture those nations, Kenya, the Central African nations, Mali, to capture the natural resources to prop up the US dollar. They have lost control in the Middle East. They really wanted to get into Iran, so they're using a backdoor approach. The central bankers are making their move, trying to take over the Bank of Iran. Iran has been giving them a little bit of control, allowing them to control interest rates, and eventually the central bankers will be making their move to put the US dollar as the reserve currency. So Iran will need to trade all of their oil using the US dollar, and we'll see how this plays out and if Iran will actually go along with this. This has nothing to do with nuclear weapons or their nuclear program. This only has to do with how they are selling their natural resources, and they want a private Western central bank in there. And right now, President Rouhani is allowing them to do this. The Revolutionary Guard right now is saying, hey, watch your step. We see what the Western powers are trying to do here. Now, is this a play? Is this something Rouhani is just allowing them to do, and then he's going to back out? Or has he been bought off by the central bankers? And if this is the case, we'll talk about what's going to happen. Syria, on the other hand, at this time is a complete mess. They know they still need to get into Syria. They need to remove Assad. They need to put in a puppet regime, and this is why Susan Rice, John Kerry, the president, has always said that they want Assad out of the government. And the only way to do that right now is to move in with some type of force. And what do we know? We know that CNN has reported that Assad has put away some chemical weapons to be used at a later date. That could be a false flag event. Right now, the U.S. is handling the disposal of the chemical weapons, and we could see some of those chemical weapons, happen to end up in the United States. And we can see that the UN right now is moving forward with allegations that Assad has committed horrific war crimes, just like they did in Libya, and Gaddafi was thrown out using NATO forces to move into Syria. So the plans of the central bank have been the same. The way they approach it might be a little different. Their approach with Iran is a little different right now, because they realize the American people will not go to war, and they have no interest in moving in and attacking any of these countries. So they are working out a different way of doing it. And we can see that the entire mainstream media is out there playing this up like it's nuclear, 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 but behind the scenes, the real action is happening. And this is why the president had secret meetings. This is why the Congress has been left out in the dark, and they have no idea what's going on, because, again, they're the low man on the totem pole. They don't know what the central bankers are doing. They really don't understand what is actually going on here. And this is why they keep on talking about sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. And this is why the Obama administration was out there saying, listen, if we put sanctions on them, the only way to get into the country is a military strike and to force our way in, because at this point, they have no alternative. It's either they go in by force and remove the government and put in a puppet government, or what they do right now is they try this backhanded approach, and they try to get this going and prop up the US dollar in this way. Do I think this way is going to work? Eventually it will not, because the Revolutionary Guard, the powers in Iran they've been fighting against the Western powers, not to have a private Western central bank in there, not to sell their oil under the U.S. dollar. I don't believe they will eventually go through with this deal, and the only thing left then is some type of false flag event to get this whole thing um, uh, to get the war started, to get uh, everything in place for the major collapse of the dollar that is coming. Okay, now let's get into the economic collapse news. Right now, in the UK, housing prices, rental prices are very high. The bubble is being blown up. And right now, to counter this, they are converting shipping containers from China to have people live in them. It's a little tiny box, and it seems like now, like they're saying, well, since you're not making money, enough money to afford all this expensive rentals and housing, you can live in a little box right now and pay us, 75 euros per week, and you can live in this type of lifestyle. And we can see that this is absolutely ridiculous. There is no reason that anyone needs to live in a box. This in UK, there is a real estate bubble brewing, just like it is in the US and in many other areas. And eventually, just like we saw in 2008, this is all going to come crumbling down. The difference this time is that there are many, many people unemployed. The UK population right now is digging into their savings to make ends meet. Salaries have not been keeping up with the real estate bubble and with inflation that has been happening with food and energy. And this is the problem that we're seeing. And eventually, this is going to implode and housing is going to collapse just like it did in 2008, but it will be 10 times worse. Now, there is some type of confusion here because unemployment last month went down to 7%, and they're saying, oh my God, look at this, unemployment's so much better. But we know it was the holiday season's coming up right now, and of course the numbers are manipulated, and we know they're manipulating, and they don't count the people who've fallen off, and they changed the calculation as of 1994. And right now, what is strange is that the unemployment the people seeking unemployment benefits rose 68,000 last week. And right now, the Labor Department admits that it's having difficulties calculating it because of the seasonally adjusted people coming back to work in retail and things like that. And normally what we're seeing is that the unemployment rate drops, and it just dropped from 7.3 to 7%. They usually go back a month, they readjust everything, and it usually comes out that there was a lot more people applying for unemployment benefits than was actually reported. But normally what they do is they don't touch the unemployment rate, they leave it at 7%, and no one realizes what's going on. And of course, this is all because it's manipulated, and this is not the true unemployment. If we look at the true unemployment, it's around 25 to 30%, depending on whose calculation you go with. And again, come this December 28th, Congress is discussing if they should extend the unemployment benefits after December 28th, and if they don't, a million plus people fall off, and that means the unemployment rate is going to drop below 7%, probably around to 6.5%, which is right in line with the Fed's tapering goal. And we can see how this is all playing out and where we are moving here, because they have some type of event ready to go. Now, the good indicator is, will they extend the unemployment benefits or not? If they extend them, that means they are not absolutely ready. They need a little bit more time. If they do not extend the unemployment benefits, they are ready to go, because then the number will hit the Fed's goal. They are ready to taper, and we know what happens when they taper. The stock market is going to fall. So if they tell everyone they are ready to taper, the unemployment has come down, we are definitely going to see an event. We will see them start to taper, or say they're going to start to taper, and then all of a sudden we're going to have something happen. Now, we understand that something is definitely going to happen, because all across the Eurozone, Italy, the United States, Canada, Australia, UK, Switzerland. They all have their bail-in documents and their procedures ready to go. Italy backs an 8% minimum bail-in for ailing banks. The public intervention on troubled banks should come after inflicting losses on bondholders through a minimum bail-in of 8% of total bank liabilities. The introduction of bail-in clauses may spread risks across the Eurozone bank sector. And right now, the European Union agrees to rules for bank bail-ins. And what they're saying is we are not going to go hit the taxpayer. What we're going to do is we're going to hit the depositors, the creditors, the bondholders of the banks, and we will do bail-ins. Just like the United States Bank of England, the FDIC Bank of England document that spells out how to do the bail-in, that has been used as the template for every single country out there, including the Eurozone. And what this goes on to say is that the EU nations agreed new rules for bank bailouts or bail-ins to save taxpayers from paying for the rescue of ailing financial institutions. They will now use bail-ins. All countries now accept the principle that if banks get into difficulty, then it will not be the taxpayer but investors and creditors that bear the cost of the banks. And it's the same thing that would happen in Cyprus. The government did not do the bailout instead to the banks. The banks instead went inside, took the depositors, froze their accounts, put capital controls into effect, and said, hey, we're only going to take 7, at most 10% of your money. It won't be any higher than that, so don't you worry. And guess what? We're only going to have about 2 weeks of capital controls, and then we'll let everyone get their money. But in reality, what happened was that the banks took 47% of the people's money. Capital controls have been in Cyprus now for almost a year, and people have been suffering there. And right now, people are not depositing money in the banks. They actually want to get their money out, but they can't at this time. So the banks in Cyprus are saying, the government is saying, and the central bank is saying, listen, if we take these capital controls away, you have to give us some type of guarantee that people will not lose their money going forward. And I haven't heard any more about these guarantees, and you can imagine what will happen once they lift these capital controls. Everyone is going to run to the bank and get their money out, because would you leave your money in there? I know I wouldn't. I would go there as fast as I possibly can to remove it. Here in the U.S. and whatever country in Australia, UK, Eurozone, I would remove money. I personally do not keep that much in the bank. I keep enough to cover my bills. The other I have invested in gold and silver, and I keep cash in certain places in my home. I would keep it in a safe, or if you like to keep it someplace else safe, that is a good idea. Now, the IMF wants you to pay 71% income tax. And what they're saying, they're suggesting a one-off capital levy, a one-time tax on private wealth as an exceptional measure to restore debt sustainability across insolvent countries. It is now called for a revenue maximizing top income tax rates. They singled out the U.S., suggesting that the U.S. government could maximize its tax revenue by increasing tax brackets to as high as 71%. Does anyone have a problem with this? I certainly do, because you know what's going to happen. Eventually, it's going to hit every single person, and everyone will be paying a lot more taxes, because I've said this in many, many reports. All of these countries cannot sustain the debt that they have. Not even the U.S. Can sustain the debt, even though they are creating money, which is really not the U.S. government, it is the Fed. The U.S. government is borrowing this money and creating treasury bonds, but the debt that the U.S. government, from borrowing this money that's created in thin air cannot be sustained. The tax revenues coming in are not enough to pay for the interest. And this is why the Fed is keeping the interest rates so low, because if the interest rates tick up, guess what happens? They are in bigger trouble. They will not be able to make any payments whatsoever. And the only way for governments to increase their revenue, because you have to remember in the Eurozone countries, they are hit with double-digit unemployment. They have austerity where they're laying off more people, cutting programs, and they just don't have the tax base to pay for this debt. The same thing in the U.S. They don't have the tax base to pay for the debt, so what are they doing? Well, they're borrowing over $1 trillion a year just to make up the difference. And that hasn't stopped. Actually, it's increasing because as time goes on, it gets worse and worse. And right now, the ratio of public debt to GDP across advanced economies will reach a historic peak of 110% next year compared to 75% in 2007. Now, we understand to help the government out, Obama came up with Obamacare. It is a complete cash grab. They get a piece of the action from the insurance company from the money they take. They also get it on the back end if you decide not to get the insurance, and they do this by taxes. And they also get it through businesses who decide to turn down those businesses who have a certain number of employees, they will have to pay taxes if they do not give them health insurance. So they get it, on both ends. If you get insurance or if you don't, the government is always receiving money because they need to increase the revenue to pay for this debt. But right now, the states are taking action, and what they are doing, South Carolina right now is looking to completely nullify Obamacare in their state, and other states are sitting there patiently waiting to see what happens. And now Georgia decided, you know what, we're not even going to wait. We're going to introduce legislation to nullify Obamacare, and they're going to sue the federal government. And the bill's main thrust is to prohibit state agencies, officers, employees of the state from implementing any provisions of the Affordable Care Act. And the 10th Amendment Center, which is a national think tank focused on keeping the federal government in check, and the 10th Amendment Center National Communications Director Mike Mahari suggested that a large-scale effort would be coming in 2014, which I believe he's going to get. This organization is going to get more states to nullify Obamacare, and eventually Obamacare will be a thing of the past. Because you have to remember, Obamacare is really not for the people. Right now, Pelosi, Reid, and many other government officials have waivers that exempt people from getting Obamacare. Now, personally to me, if Obamacare is so great, and I've said this many times, they should have been first in line to go get it. They shouldn't take subsidiaries. They should just go ahead and get the expensive insurance with high deductibles. But how many of our government officials did this? Great. How about our president? He should have been the first one. When it went live, he should have been sitting down with Pelosi saying, and Biden, saying, this is fantastic. Let me go on the website, apply for Obamacare. I'm going to pay full price, get what you're giving me. This is fantastic. But guess what? They didn't do it. You know why? Because Obamacare is the worst thing out there. And they know it. It was designed to get money from the people. That's it. It's not meant to help you with insurance. It's not meant to keep you healthy. It is a cash grab. That is it, period. Now, we understand the U.S. is spying on their people, the NSA, the DHS, TSA, FBI, CIA, and every other country has been also implementing protest laws, secrecy laws, and we see that France now, who were, complaining, and all the European nations complaining that the U.S. is spying on them and whatnot. Well, they're doing some of their own spying, and right now the outraged opponents of the new law allowing French intelligence and the government to spy on Internet users without any authorization say it will weaken the country's position in the European and international debate on protection of personal data. So France right now wants to spy on every single person in their country without any type of warrant or authorization from anyone. Sounds very familiar, and every single country is going to do this. Why? Because they need to keep an eye on their people. They need to understand what they're doing, who they're talking to, and they need to create these social profiles. So you're going to see more draconian laws like a Secrecy Act, protest laws, laws that put people in prison, and laws that will spy on the people. And we see this happening all over the place. And Article 13 on the new law allows intelligence services from the State Defense, Interior, Economy, Tax, and Finance ministries to find out just about anything about any individual without authorization from a judge. And you can see why they are doing this, but of course the government officials always come out and say the same thing, and they are saying that these new measures are very vital to the country's national security. We need to protect the country from terrorism and organized crime, so we need to spy on every single person, and we need to know what you're doing. It's all for national security, and that is the line they use in every single country. Now, the people in the U.S. are a little fed up with these agencies spying on the people, and right now there is a White House petition demanding for a reform of the Electronic Communication Privacy Act to prevent undue snooping on Americans' online communications. And the petition hit the 100,000 signatures, and now the government needs to respond in some way. Americans are deeply concerned about NSA surveillance, and that is what the petition reads. And they reached the 100,000. Actually, it's going over the 100,000 signatures. So right now, the government needs to respond to this petition. And it's funny, when this whole petition system came about, it was only 25,000 signatures, and then what happened was they saw that people had real issues, and they upped it to 50,000 signatures. Then they upped it to 100,000 signatures because they really don't want to respond to this. This was just making people feel good, like they had a voice. And I wouldn't be surprised if they say, you know what, we're getting so much of this, we need to up this to 200,000. But right now, as it stands, they need to respond to what is going on right now. Now, out in the Ukraine, now we understand that the Ukraine said to Russia, okay, you know what, we have a deal. But they didn't sign anything yet. We said, we have a deal, we're going to go with Russia. We turned down the EU. And then all of a sudden the central bankers said, you know what, no. You're going to do what we say. They started riots out in the Ukraine. They made them. They've done this in many countries to make and force the government into doing something they wouldn't normally do. And what happened was there were mass protests because everyone was very concerned that they wanted to go with the EU because the Eurozone is doing so great. We have Spain, Cyprus, Greece, Portugal, Italy, all double-digit unemployment. Youth employment is between 40 and 60%, and all these countries are on bailouts or bail-ins, and they can't make ends meet. They're going after Social Security reserves. They're implementing draconian laws. But let's go with the EU. So they decided not to go with the EU, and we had all these riots. Now, the Ukraine and the EU have agreed to prepare a roadmap for the implementation of the Trade and Association Agreement. Basically, what happened here is there was so much pressure on the president of Ukraine. He folded. He caved in to the central bankers. They got their way, and they forced him to do what they wanted him to do. And Ukraine will soon sign the association agreement with the European Union, taking into account the national strategic interests, which means that there were a lot of riots. He was worried about being ousted, and he completely folded and went with the EU. Now, Russia is deploying a new radar system, a radar that is able to track targets at ranges of over 3,000 kilometers, has been activated within the Russian air defense system. And this radar, the Kolokino radar station, is able to track aerial targets flying as far away as Denmark. So it can pick up any aircraft with a radar cross section comparable to the one of a Cessna light plane would be detected by the new radar, even if it is flying low altitude. Even a fighter jet taking off in the Netherlands could be seen by the new surveillance station. Because what are they doing? They understand that the U.S., the NATO nations, are not dismantling the missile shield ranging from Poland all the way to Romania. They understand that 40,000 troops of NATO soldiers are doing drills along the Russian border. They understand that the U.S. is moving into Asia, encircling China. Japan is trying to change its constitution to be a more aggressive type of force instead of a pacifist nation. And the U.S. is putting missiles on Guam right now, and they are setting everything up. And Russia understands what is happening here. They understand it's like a big game of chess. You know, the central bankers make a move, Russia and China make a move. Russia and China already shot up a flare saying, listen, we are done with you central bankers. We are no longer accepting U.S. dollars or treasury bonds. We are rejecting them. We're actually going to start selling them. We are going to get rid of our U.S. dollars. China is making a deal with Singapore. And as soon as they made that deal to merge their markets, to make the yuan a larger financial tool across the world, all of a sudden there were riots in Singapore, and there hasn't been riots in Singapore since 1969. That was the last one, and all of a sudden there was riots. And we see in Africa they were making a deal for Kenya to be the clearinghouse for the yuan. The yuan they're going to use to sell their oil with instead of using the U.S. dollar. China is making deals all over the world to use the yuan. England has made a trade deal with China. They're allowing Chinese banks to move into the UK, and they did a huge financial swap with the yuan in the UK. So we can see what is happening right now and where this is headed. And right now, Japan understands, because it's part of the NATO nations. They understand what is going to happen, and they understand that war is coming, and this is why they are prepping for this. And Japan right now is setting up its amphibious military unit to counter the China threat in the Pacific area. And a draft of Japan's defense plan outlines military buildup as concerns grow over China. Japan will set up a new amphibious military unit and deploy unarmed surveillance drones in its southwest area over China. And Japan plans to set up an amphibious unit designed to take back the remote islands in case of an invasion and boost the number of fighter jet squadrons in the area, because they understand what is coming. So they are moving all their military assets and putting them into place. Now, something very interesting happened. The Pentagon and Congress are working on a China war plan. The U.S. military needs a more focused war plan specific to China, especially after China's recent declaration of an air defense zone over the East China Sea. Pentagon's overall defense strategy to pivot to the Pacific: the U.S. should buy more Virginia-class attack submarines, prioritizing long-range anti-ship missiles, carrier-based drones, and missile defense technology, the analyst told the House Armed Services Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee. And we can see what is happening. They are moving all military assets to the Pacific region. They are setting up missile bases. They are moving all of the Pacific Fleet and other parts of the U.S. fleet into the Pacific area, and this is all for what is going to happen, and that is World War III. And this goes on to say, while while naval modernization is a natural development for any seafaring nation such as China, it is clear the modernization is emboldening the Chinese government to exert their interest by bullying their neighbors and pushing back the United States in the Asian Pacific region. And right now, the Chinese defense spending has increased from an estimated 45 to 60 billion annually in 2003. It is up to $200 billion today. So they have increased it quite a bit because they understand their next move is to become the reserve currency of the world. The central bankers will not let this happen. Now, as I talked about yesterday, the illusion of this nuclear deal, it has nothing to do with the nuclear deal with Iran. It all has to do with central banks moving into position and getting that US dollar as a reserve currency to prop up the dollar for a little bit longer, because you have to remember, the central bankers believe if they can continually spread their debt and have more countries use the US dollar, they can keep this going a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer before it crashes. And right now, the White House kind of killed any type of Iran sanctions that Congress wanted to implement. And there will be no new sanctions this year. This is what an insider is saying, because President Obama and his administration said, listen, if Congress implements new sanctions, he will have only one alternative, and that is a military strike, because that is the only way to get Iran to use the US dollar as the reserve currency. Just like they thought they were going to go into Syria. Their false flag event was chemical weapons, and they positioned the United States positioned all the fleet in the Mediterranean, thinking they were going to strike and they were going to get in there and remove Assad. Well, right now they're trying a backdoor approach. They are trying to maneuver, and right now Rouhani is agreeing and cooperating, and the central bankers are sneakily moving in for the kill. And we're going to have to see this play out because the Revolutionary Guard is catching wind and understanding what the Western nations are trying to do. Now, do I know if Rouhani is paid off or not, or in the pockets of the central bankers? I don't know at this time, so we're going to have to see how this plays out. So meanwhile, the U.S., the central bankers, do not want other countries and other corporations to do business with Iran just yet. Why? Because they have not taken over the central banks and put the US dollar as the reserve currency. So right now, the US government is saying they do not want oil firms to reach out to Iran at this time. This is not the right time. The United States is working to make it clear to international oil companies and other firms that sanctions on Iran remain in place and they should not be reaching out to the Islamic Republic. We are very actively dissuading international oil companies and others who think that now may be the time to test the waters in Iran. Now, they can't do this because they are not selling their oil using the US dollar, and they don't want to lose all this money by them going in there and not using the US dollar. So they're saying, no, 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 no. Everyone, you just wait a minute. Let us get everything in place, and then we can, have you come in and make deals with Iran, because then we know they are using the US dollar. Now, there are different scenarios that could happen here. The U.S. central bankers take control over Iran. They replace the central bank there with the private Western Central Bank, and they start using the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, and everything is fine and everything goes on. And the only problem now is Syria, where they need to create some type of false flag event to enable the U.S. or NATO forces to go in and strike Syria, because right now we have a couple things happening in Syria. We have them reporting that Assad has a cache of chemical weapons. We understand that the U.S. is disposing the chemical weapons out at sea on a U.S. ship. We also understand that the UN is bringing Assad up on charges for war crimes, which will allow NATO forces to go in and remove Assad. So That is still being played out at the same time. The U.S. also has the problem with China becoming the next reserve currency, and they will not let that happen. So, do I think everything will go smoothly and perfectly with Iran with no glitches, bumps, or potholes in the road? Absolutely not. So, what we're already hearing from the Revolutionary Guard is they're catching wind of this. Now, if Rouhani is in the back pocket of the central bankers, we might see some type of revolution or overthrow of Rouhani and remove him from office. And if that happens, the U.S. will have one alternative, and that alternative would be to go in and strike Iran and put them back on the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, and we could see a false flag combined with the Syrian false flag. And, or the Iran doesn't go along with the full deal. The U.S. central bankers prepare some type of false flag. Rouhani catches wind of what they're actually trying to do, and they stop him from putting the U.S. dollar in as a reserve currency, and they stop the central bankers from even moving forward into the country. And that whole thing will go down the drain. Then we'll have a false flag event here, and then everything will move in. They are definitely going to do some type of false flag event. How big it will be, it all depends on Iran right now. And we have to remember, this is not a perfect science where, oh, look, if they do this, we do this. They are trying all different tactics to reach their goal. And if tactics change, just like we saw the Syrian event where everyone thought we were going in to strike, but all of a sudden a deal was made because everyone was realizing that nobody was for a war and they needed a way out of the situation. Here they're trying a backdoor approach, but Syria is a whole nother problem, and we can see how this is all formulating and building up, and they are definitely preparing some type of an event. Some event will occur. What it will be, it could be a cyber attack, it could be a chemical weapon attack, and it could be a dirty bomb type of nuclear weapon. This is still in play right now. And right now, in Syria, the Western powers are completely losing control there. What they're saying is the situation on the ground has become so complicated that the Western powers are more worried. There are so many factions and militant groups that the civil war has become impossible to control or keep track of what is going on inside Syria. And, they stop non-lethal aid. They don't know who's in control of anything. And this is a perfect setup for some type of an event. And we know that we have many things happening here. We have the dollar imploding and collapsing. We have the stock market reaching a bubble, the treasury bond market reaching a bubble, the student loan reaching a bubble, housing reaching a bubble. The European nations right now are in a recession/depression. It is just getting worse. The bail-in documents have been put into place right now. All countries, the Eurozone, are ready, and they are ready to go tomorrow if they have to. And we can see that many things are in place. And right now, the world's stock exchanges move to combat cyber attacks. The move comes amid growing concern among exchanges about the effect that a large-scale cyber attack could be happening in the next year. And they want to protect all the exchanges. It could be that we saw these glitches in NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, the Chicago Mercantile. We all had glitches, and the Chicago Mercantile was actually hit with a cyber attack. They don't know the extent of the damage. They don't even know if there's a malware implanted. We understand that there's a NeverQuest malware that can infiltrate into the system. It can siphon off money. It can steal your bank accounts. It can steal your passwords. It can bring the financial institutions to their knees. And right now, a separate report this year showed that more than half of the world's exchanges had fought off incursions on their technological systems during the past 12 months. Exchanges in America and Europe, in particular, felt existing laws did not act as sufficient deterrent for these cyber attacks. And they are very nervous right now because the attacks are ramping up, that there could be a major one coming within the next year. Well, I'm going to say there's a good possibility that a major cyber attack is going to hit the banks and the exchanges, because we understand that this collapse is coming. We understand that they are ramping up the taper talk. They're ramping it up where they're saying, oh, it could be December, it could be January. The economy is really improving. Unemployment's coming down. Stock market's reaching all-time new highs. Look at this. Everything is actually absolutely perfect. We have Obama, who is campaigning during the summer saying the housing market was improving. He has Biden and other Democratic leaders campaigning, letting everyone know the recovery is in full swing. And we understand that something is about to happen. We've even heard reports that there are some people looking to pursue the impeachment process of Obama, and they're even saying that there could be some type of event to take all eyes off the impeachment of Obama, and it could be some type of false flag event. And let me just say, a major false flag event like a cyber attack, a chemical weapon attack, would do many, many things. If they were pursuing impeachment, it would take all eyes off of that. If the economy was collapsing, it would take all eyes off of that. It would allow the U.S., the central bankers, to strike Syria or Iran if they needed, or even China if they needed. So this is the perfect opportunity for the central bankers, U.S. government, to pursue some type of event. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.